landlords can no longer freely just be landlords.
Class action lawsuits against landlords, and some of them are in the legislature writing these bills.
Don't get upset when we're supporting certain candidates or certain issues. We're not here on the Republican or the Democrat side. We're here on the realtor side.
We all were told that we needed to get rid of the Gallagher Amendment and this would make this all better, and now everybody's upset because they didn't pay attention back then.
The government is not really here to help people's lives be better. It's not the job of the government to make me feel happy about my environment.
Get involved.
Yeah.
We need you to get involved.
Yeah, we need you to get involved. We need you to help us out because the media is not going to curry our favor.
The right of first refusal that you mentioned definitely affects people who are trying to do 1031 exchanges because the Good morning. I'm here with Dr. Clarissa Thomas, and we are doing our Policy Pulse podcast for the month of February. So welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Weldon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, we had a very interesting meeting this morning talking about a lot of the issues going on at the state, local, and federal levels that affect our real estate industry and our members. So we'll be talking about that this morning and bringing you up to speed on some of the things we're watching at the state level. So anything you want to start off with this morning?
Well, I mean, I think that the overarching discussion that we had was trying to understand some of the governor's priorities because housing is their biggest legislative priority item at the state level, and how that meshes or not meshes with our industry's priorities and our protection of private property rights, and the amount of money that they're trying to allocate or set aside from the state between, usually not general fund because everything else is allocated in the state of Colorado to different silos, but coming up with grants, some priority budgeting items and things like that towards what the governor considers his priorities, which are centered around increasing, obviously, housing affordability units, increasing the supply of housing, transit-oriented development housing. And what that means is building housing around transit development, just like the term says it, right? So if there's light rail, which we don't have, but in the Denver metro area would be anywhere there's a light rail stop, they would increase density of housing units within those areas. And say, I'm not sure exactly how that would be applicable to places like Colorado Springs. We have bus lines. That is a transit depot, right? A transit section. And so maybe it's how they increase. But within that, there is that caveat of where the state decides to do things and mandates localities and how it overrides or disregards local land use development. And so it's going to be interesting as those bills move through how those priorities from the state end up combining with the legislators that are promoting those bills for the governor or on behalf of the governor's office, and then with all the different groups, apartment association, realtors, home builders, landlord coalition groups, and all the other stakeholders, and how we navigate and be able to make policy make sense, in the protection of private property rights. And so that is obviously, where we spent the majority of our time this morning trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And some of it is very painful. And yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I could summarize that sentiment anymore. And we could obviously talk about the specific bills and how they impact, respectively, our community, our state, homeowners, and obviously our feelings as a realtor organization.
And there's almost 50 bills that have already been introduced that we're monitoring through our LPC group. And so there's no way we can get that all in a half an hour. So there might be two or three that we might want to touch on that might probably be more important to our members with respect to helping their clients who especially own rental properties, how they might be able to navigate through some of these bills and what we're watching on their behalf.
Right, and I mean, I would think that for us, like the pressing issues even last year that they carry through for this legislative cycle, that we were on amending, our industry amends bills because we try to come to the table that we know it's going to pass because there's no stopping legislation in Colorado right now. There's a supermajority, it's almost veto proof. And so the majority party, if they want something, they can have it. And it's a matter of how within that minority voice we can articulate the points and the protections of private property rights and making things a little bit better. So what carries from last year is obviously warrant of habitability, carries a first right of refusal that has to do with, the transaction, the government's ability to come in and have the first right to say that they want to buy a property or not. And then limits on residential occupants, occupants for the state. This is the state legislative policy. And what are some of the other issues that you guys are just a little concerned about?
Well, those are some of the big ones. There's bills that they're trying to introduce or will be introducing and that kind of get us into a situation where it's going to make it very difficult for the landlord to be able to evict a tenant, or once the lease is up, have the tenant move out without it costing the landlord 2 to 3 months of rent. That's going to make it very expensive for them to be able to keep their properties. The right of first refusal that you mentioned definitely affects people who are trying to do 1031 exchanges because the timing windows that they've got in this bill are way outside of the 180 days that you have as a property owner to exercise and finish a 1031 exchange. So that's going to make it very difficult as well. And there's a lot of things in there that gives the government an advantage over the private individual who's trying to make an offer on that property. And some of the legislation even has things in there that I think are contrary to our license law as realtors that we have to abide by within our contracts with the seller with respect to giving information to the buyer that's competing against other buyers, and that's in the legislation. So there's a lot of things like that I'm
and
concerned about.
those are like the general concerns that, the policy sounds good. And I'm not saying you and I, but in general, legislators come at it from the perspective that they want to promote policy that makes things better for all Coloradans. And so in their mind, first right of refusal. It's like, hey, let's allow the government, the right to come in and say that they can take a stab or a bite at the apple when it comes to being able to be up for the purchase of a piece of property or, like a multi-unit housing complex. It sounds really good on the merits of it, but it's contradictory to everything that we stand for in the industry, where it's about private property rights. And when individuals are having to compete with the government for that same dream of homeownership is really difficult. And I'm not sure that while the sentiment is they're coming at it the government wants to be able to have subsidized housing for folks. That's great and all, but then you're imparting your will on an individual, on a private citizen, and anytime we allow the government to come in, I always go back to, we are the United States of America for a reason. We were not set up like the Soviet bloc of the pre-1980s. We were not set up like the Iron Curtain Federal Democratic Republic of Germany. We were not those countries when we were set up. And America was set up in such a way because our founding fathers were very adamant about making sure that we had everything for the potential of individuals and businesses to thrive, flourish, without the heavy hand of the crown, right? And where we are today is we're seeing a picture where, like the bureaucratic structure keeps growing, not only in Colorado, but our entire country. And it's like, how is it that individuals can pursue that free enterprise creativity, small business, dream, if they're going to have to compete against the government, which keeps growing and growing? And so this is not even about ideological differences. It's about where do we want to be as a society, and And it's very difficult for our folks, to not want to yell at us, right, and say, hey, you, this is not partisan politics. If you're a Democrat, you're probably thrilled, that the majority is reflective of your personal views. But we're not here on the Republican or the Democrat side. We're here on the realtor side. And we stand for private property rights, the expansion of the enterprise system, free enterprise system. And free does not mean that people get it free. It means that you have that free access to be able to compete for things and be entrepreneurial. And so it no longer stands as free enterprise or private property rights when the government gets to dictate play on things. And yes, I'm editorializing it, based on the way I see my lens. But as the advocate for this association for our realtors and our consumers, it's very difficult, to not have a little infuriation about how everything is playing out in our current political environment, because little by little, those private property rights are being chipped away. And I'm not sure that me screaming at the top of my soul lungs is enough for other people to see that this is a problem. Elections have consequences, and it really is. There's not enough folks within because we do have those folks within the Democrat Party right now in the state legislature, but there's not enough of them, those reasonable-minded, common-sense Democrats that they're needing more help. And the majority of their party construct right now at the Capitol is not seeing things the same way that they see things.
Right.
Some of those friends of ours have been realigned or reassigned to different committees. So it's very difficult for us in the legislative process to be able to stop the bleeding, if I could say that.
True. And, I think, too, there's a lot of unintended consequences that comes with well-meaning intentions. And one of the biggest things that the governor is pushing is he wants more affordable housing.
Right.
Well, if you reduce the supply of housing through some of these laws that they're trying to pass, which will drive investors and landlords and property owners out of our state, and they will invest their money elsewhere, you will reduce the supply and the demand will stay high, and that's never going to bring the price down. But they don't seem to understand that that's going to be the consequence. And actually, when you read some of these bills and you see who some of the sponsors are, they seem to be bills that are really written in such a way that they're going to be very easy to go and sue landlords on and be able to have class action lawsuits against landlords. And some of these attorneys practice that particular type of law. And some of them are in the legislature writing these bills, which seems like a little bit of a conflict of interest, that's maybe not what's best for the general public of Colorado.
Right. Well, but I mean, right now what we're also seeing, and one of the bills that's actually being considered, I think today at 1:30 committee, has to do specifically with that landlord-tenant relationship, how the pendulum keeps swinging away from the landlord towards the tenant, because there's sentiment that because rent is so high, it's all the landlord's fault. And I guess we can't, like the white elephant is that, landlords have to make money, but landlords have all sorts of expenses that go into play. They have to maintain a property, they have to make sure that there's this warrant of habitability, right? And so we've always had those things. We've had pretty decent standards. So we can't control if there's bad apples within our landlord population.
Correct.
There's always going to be slumlords. I mean, it's the laws of diminishing returns, right? You have good people just like you have bad people in anything. And so, but it's those bad people, the bad actors within any community that end up driving legislation. We have, the pendulum has swung to such an extent that landlords can no longer freely just be landlords.
Right.
They're having all these constrictions put on them and restrictions and regulations, and, the cost of doing business for them having this piece of the American dream to build wealth, to have capital, is almost punitive. It's like, nope, you can't do that because somebody else doesn't have it. And where did we go into the society saying that these folks are, should be, punished and penalized because they worked really hard to achieve that? And so how we fight as an association, as an industry, right, of association of realtors, to help the consumer and our clients be able to say, hey, you could still get into, multifamily property or a duplex or whatever, if that's your investment, that's your dream. We could still do that, but it's also incumbent on us and it's incumbent on our members to understand that don't get upset when we're supporting certain candidates or certain issues, because there's two sides to the equation. The sound bites that the media post are really good, but this is why we do what we do. And there's lots of people, and there's a growing community of interest within our Realtor Association of folks that are really passionate about being advocates for the homeowners. And so not only are they helping you help yourself pretty much, right? They're doing all this because we need to make sure that homeownership continues to thrive. And there's never been a better time for all of us to be like enjoined in this fight, but we can't do it alone, right?
No.
And we can no longer be an association of people that don't care about what the politics is, because politics very much cares about what your business is, and this is why they've been chipping away at our rights and increasing regulations, because the politicians, are busy taking away your ability to make a living.
That's right.
And I mean, that's what I say, man, I just sit here and it really drives me nuts that I can't convey enough how people ought to be interested. I may care about it. It's what I do, right? Day in and day out.
Right.
And just because I care about it doesn't mean that everybody has to care about it. But I could have done this by myself and been the sole advocate 20 years ago without a problem. Today, they really don't care, and they, again, is our political legislative bodies. They don't really care about the hired, professionals that are doing the lobbying or advocacy. They want to hear from the populations, right, that are being affected. And I think that this is where other folks are succeeding against our interest. It's those emotional stories. It's those, I don't want to say that emotions win at the end of the day, but most of the time they are winning at the Capitol. And those committee rooms and testimonials are flooded with people that are impacted negatively.
Right.
And it's not our people crying. And I'm not trying to be insensitive. It's all the people that are on the other side of our issues that are winning that conversation. They are winning the dialogue because their emotional outbursts are playing a bigger role in what we do, because our people are too busy helping consumers and their clients do what it is to achieve that dream of homeownership. And so I'm not trying to be insensitive about it. I'm just being realistic. How is it that we can get those people within our group and our communities to care enough that, hey, it's not just about me being able to sell a home today and be at a closing or do whatever it is, write up a contract. It's the 5 or 20 minutes or the hour that you might give today may save a lot more of a headache down the line. And we are getting beat in the legislative directives because we don't have the people that are willing to stand up and fight. And like I said, we might be a community, our state legislative policy committee might be a group of, 77 people, 44 of them vote for positions.
Right.
Our local public policy committee might be 40 people, but those numbers are not enough.
No.
And so this is where we're seeing the results of the legislative action. And yeah, it matters when election November 2024 rolls around, but it's not enough to stop legislative policy from happening in 2023, 2024, and anything else that's already been in the works for years. And so how do we do that call for action, right, to move the rug under our members' feet and even the consumers? Help us help you. I mean, I can't even, so I said, I can't emphasize it enough, but it's frustrating.
Well, and a perfect example of what you're talking about is everyone's seeing their property tax bills now. They're starting to get the realization that my property taxes have increased substantially. Well, we all were told that we needed to get rid of the Gallagher Amendment and this would make this all better and we wouldn't have these issues, and now we have these issues. And now everybody's upset because they didn't pay attention back then. This is the same thing. They need to be paying attention today because you're right, the landlord or the property owner has a lot of expenses, one of which is their taxes.
Yep.
So because their taxes have doubled, and especially in properties that are multifamily properties, such as we're talking about, they have to pass that increase on to the tenant. So
Right.
you're not helping with affordable housing. So what are they going to do? They're going to take their money, they're going to sell their property, they're going to move to another state that has lower taxes, less regulatory climate, and we've reduced the supply of housing in Colorado, which was not the intent of what the governor is trying to do. So I really think somehow we have to get our members and we have to get the media to understand that there are some serious issues with some of these bills that are in the Senate right now in the House that need to be addressed and need to be communicated. And whether it's social media, the evening news, this podcast, whatever it is, that needs to get out to people.
Yeah, but it's even complicated to throw in the media and have a sense of expectation that they will be our allies. I mean, we would like to convey that message, but I think we know it. I mean, there's very little media. I think that it's up to us in citizen journalism to be able to promote that which we are trying to, to be successful with. And in this case, we are using a means of a podcast to convey to our members, this is important, get involved, care about this, because the media is not going to curry our favor. They have all sorts of other stories to cover. They obviously like to report on affordable housing, but are they going to report on the affordable housing and all the effects that it has on our community and the impact from a lens that actually talks about these are the unintended consequences? And rent control is a prime example. We haven't even thrown that in there right now, and that's coming. It hasn't been introduced yet, but we know it's coming. And so where in this balance do people think that all these policies that sound really good, we're going to control the levels of rent because it's going to make it more affordable. And they don't talk about the fact that it doesn't make it affordable for anybody. It affixes that level of whatever you're paying, and then there's all these other collateral damages, if I could say that.
Sure.
There's no upkeep on the properties because those landlords that have to, abide by rent-controlled tenant aspects, it's like there's no incentive. There's no incentive to actually do anything to make a property better. And so then you have properties that will start falling into the blighted perspective of things.
Sure.
And then who does it benefit? It benefits no one, not even the tenants in those properties. And so while at first it sounds really good that we're going to do this because it's going to help consumers pay cheaper rent, and I'm like, what about the laws of economic supply and demand? Let the free market dictate how things play. And again, I go back to it. This is where we firmly believe in the free enterprise system. It's not obviously the same as a free market, but free market solutions always end up dictating. Sometimes they work really well. Sometimes they don't work so well, right? But let the free market have at it instead of saying we're going to come in and have the government control something, create regulatory structures that end up like almost clamping down on people. It crushes the spirit, and I'm not sure why people can't understand that. I mean, the government is not really here to help people's lives be better. And I know that might be my lens. But they're there to help in certain extents. Infrastructure, that's one of their basic services. Sure. They have to do road maintenance, upkeep, things like that. It's not the job of the government to make me feel happy about my environment. I am at free will, to make me feel better about life. And if I'm waiting for the government to make my life better, then I'm obviously misguided as to what the role of government should be in my personal well-being. And I think that this is the disconnect that we have as a society right now, that people are thinking that the government is there to improve their lives.
Right. And
we're obviously failing as a society when we expect the government to make us happy. Absolutely. Because that's not it.
No, they're not, and they're probably the most inefficient provider of goods and services that there is. And you can see that in countries where, as you mentioned, like in Germany and Russia and places like that, where the government has provided things in Eastern Germany that the services were terrible. You can look at Cuba. Cuba was a beautiful, beautiful place until Castro came along, and the island fell in disrepair because the government couldn't provide all the services from a centralized location.
Right.
The free market system does that better than any other system out there. And so to see that they're pushing, and the media is in helping them push the narrative that they know better how to provide
Right.
housing and services for the public, it just bothers me a lot because they obviously don't. And everything they do costs way more
Right.
than it should. So stay in your lane and let the private market handle
and
this.
I know that we have, because we are a wonderful amalgamation of citizens in this country, whether it's Americans or wherever people have come from. I understand that, like many folks, like I always say, yeah, my background, I have, like Spanish, and I have, my dad was from one country, my mother's from another South American country. We lived here, but we understood the differences of those societal, like formations. And I know that I've got many friends within our industry here that do come from different countries. And so they have their perspective, and their view is that things are better, in a socialistic approach. And so that's why it should be experimented here. But I'm like, I could tell you that expecting or having this norm, and I will say that it's almost utopian to think that we could set everything in this growing country. What are we at? 336 million people?
Well,
And without, the current influx that we're having, right, that we're experiencing. But the situation is, you cannot expect everybody, there's no free lunch. There is no such thing as free lunch.
No.
We were not set up like that 200 plus years ago.
No.
And so for people to think that we could go in and now make it a free lunch society, somebody ends up paying for it.
Always.
And this is where you see, like the push for taxation, right? That the taxes have to be able to pay for the services that we keep, thinking and telling people that they're free. They're not free. Somebody's going to pay for it. And so that's what I said. It's in me in deference to all those members that we do have that came from other places that, there's different idealistic approaches to how we can make the U.S. better. But the U.S. was set up as a certain experiment that worked great for many years. And right now we're seeing those pressure points really drive it, to an insolvency level, because we cannot continue taxing people through what we have and then expecting folks to have a piece of the American dream. And I think that this is where all these policies are starting to blend. They're starting to really create a disconnect between, those basic services that the government is there for, whether it's local, state, federal, and how our members need to, I guess, understand that public policy is having a bigger role in how they transact business because of unintended consequences in the legislative environment that are making it more difficult, for that dream of homeownership, for real estate transactions to flourish. And we will get through it, the storm will pass, right? But right now it's very difficult because our state and federal government keep throwing policies that are unsustainable.
Totally.
With, at the federal level, let's print more money for X, Y, and Z. But then in turn, we're going to tax, whether it's increase the rate of taxation for businesses, we're going to increase the rate of taxation for individuals. The state level, we're going to make businesses pay for more. We're going to increase, fees, services, all these different things. People are not going to be, and then we're not going to tell people the truth that inflation is very much a part of what we're experiencing.
Absolutely.
So that's why it's so tough right now. I could go down a different approach and talk about different things about this stuff, but I can't even begin to comprehend if our members are not passionate and engaged now. We could still course correct little by little, but we have to start sooner rather than later with our industry. And right now the time is for our members to step up, heed the calls for action when we put them out. When we say, please help us communicate with legislators, tell them that this is not good public policy. We're not crying wolf. It's right there. We don't want people calling us after and say, hey, I heard that this bill passed. Why didn't you guys do anything? well, we know we tried doing something. We just
Right.
didn't have the votes
Right.
to kill it, or
Right.
we didn't have enough people showing up when it mattered for us to
testify.
stop this crappy piece of legislation for, let's not sugarcoat it. A lot of this stuff is really crappy, and we're trying to make the most of it in the midst of a very difficult uphill battle when it comes to the preservation of private property rights.
Well, there's a great book out called Who Moved My Cheese? And it's really kind of about nobody pays much attention to things that are going on around them until they start directly affecting them. And by then, it's too late. They've moved your cheese and you don't have your cheese anymore. So I think what you're saying and what we're trying to communicate is pay attention now, get involved,
Right.
testify, make your voice heard, because otherwise you're going to lose your cheese.
Yeah.
And once you've lost your cheese, you're done. You don't have any more. So
Right.
they now have your cheese, and then they'll give it to you in the bits that they want you to have it. And that's the real issue that I think we have to try to get communicated to our
Right.
members as well as to the media. And it can work. There was a bill that was tried to get passed or introduced about putting registration fees on all different kinds of pets. And there was such a public outcry that that bill has been removed.
Well, but
So-
it has legs still.
But it's,
I heard on Friday that they're
still coming back with it?
I mean, so
Yeah.
when UPA, this is like the
Goldfish
magic of,
Union got upset about it and they're involved now or what?
so this is when I say that nothing is really dead until they adjourn 120 days after the mark of the session, right? So this will be May 8th would be, I think, they adjourn January 10th. So I think it's May 8th, maybe, give and take. But the bill, yes, there was public outcry, and it had been postponed indefinitely. But then all of a sudden, this was on Wednesday, and then on Friday, it seems like the bill still has legs. And I'm like, only in this current political environment
Right.
could you see things that are flatlined be revived.
Right.
And so my point is that nothing is really dead until it has been,
And along those lines,
it has been,
it has been actually buried.
Yes.
Yeah, sent out to sea. Along those lines, in the couple of minutes we have left, you mentioned this morning that they're trying to change the rules in the State House.
They did.
To basically make it to where the last 2 weeks of the session, if you disagree with a proposed bill, there will be no discussion.
right.
That does
They
not
can
seem
shut
like
down
that's
debate.
Yeah, that does not seem like that's beneficial to the citizens or to the process, the democratic process that we have in this state. Do you want to touch on that for the last
Sure.
couple
So
minutes?
last year, what we saw is that the last 3 days of the session, which is, technically the 72 hours, because the calendar is so overwhelmed with last minute legislation, they're trying to reconcile differences in bills from the Senate and the House, conversely. There are certain rules, parliamentary procedure rules within the House and the Senate that official rules of business can be suspended. And so it's just kind of like, okay, you patch it through. And that means that the dynamics of being able to debate bills change. The consideration of bills on the calendar, you could take one thing, versus another. It literally gets sent over to the other chamber. They come back, they can do concurrent committees, things like that, right? It's a free-for-all. But it's within that process in order to make those deadlines before they have to adjourn on the 120th day of the session. So this year, it is now 10 days, which technically will amount to the last 2 weeks
Right.
of the session, because the weekends don't count.
Yeah,
It's
they don't work
business
on
days,
Saturday and
technically.
Sunday.
I mean, last year they did work on Saturdays and Sundays a lot, but so it's giving them the last 10 days of the session to pretty much suspend the rules of business, of regular business. And so it entitles the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, to pretty much just shut down debate on legislation that somebody might not like. And I'm saying, who has accountability on that, right? Because the majority of citizens don't really pay attention to all the semantics about the legislative bills. They actually don't. Most people in Colorado really don't give a rat's about.
Well, if you read them, they're hard to
Political
understand.
happenings.
Yeah.
And so this is not the Super Bowl, right? People are not going to be entertained. They're not going to want to watch this. This is not the Puppy Bowl either, if you're an animal lover. the legislative cycle is for people like us. We're gluttons for punishment. We want to hear what's happening, why we care about these bills. And so for us, it matters that the rules are suspended for 10 days and that the normal operational procedures are not, considered, because if I don't like something, I could shut it down. And so that's not cool. It's not democratic. And, for all the dialogue of it being a democratic society, it fails the smell test because you're shutting down a group that you don't agree with because it doesn't, fit in with what you're trying to accomplish. And so, all the talk of the governor and his opening address to the state, let's disagree better, right? He wants disagreement to be better. Well, how can disagreement be better if
you're not allowed to talk?
The party on the side of the governor's agenda is saying we're just going to suspend the rules, and for 10 days, before we adjourn, we're just going to push policy, whether you guys like it or not.
Right.
And so those are our issues, and I would hope that Governor Polis, and somebody within his office actually says something. But it's a done deal. I mean, these bills, all these procedural bills have already been read through the record. They've already been voted on. And, of course, they've been passed on party line votes. And so it's very difficult, to, as a lover of the process, I'm like, wow. I mean, not even when the Republicans controlled everything, I don't remember ever seeing something like that. And so, and I used to work at the Capitol in those days. So it's very different to have that flip of the equation. But then again, the Republicans didn't control with so many, wide margin of seats, right? So they still had to work and cross party lines. And, and Republicans considered some really stupid bills when they controlled everything. But they didn't shut down debate. You know what I mean?
Right.
Bills got argued, debated. The clock ran out. Yeah. So
No,
it's that's where sometimes I'm like, wow, this is really fascinating. This is really not civil discourse.
No, it's really not. No.
So, but this is what we're up against, and and our committee is doing great work for its membership, and and we hope that more people get ginned up because
Get involved.
Yeah,
we need you to get involved.
Yeah, we need you to get involved.
Yeah.
We need you to help us out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as you can see, it's been another busy month at the public policy meeting. I'm Weldon Shaver. I'm the chair of the Public Policy Committee. This is Dr. Clarissa Thomas, and we thank you for joining our podcast today, and we'll see you next month.